Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, it's been a little bit since we stopped in and had a chat about each Ascendancy and how they are doing compared to each other, their strengths and their weaknesses, what makes them special, and how that ranks their potential against the other Ascendancy choices. So today we're going to have another roundup of how things are looking, including one mention at the top here of congratulations to the first level 100 player in Path of Exile 2. I've been using the ladder rankings of experience gain in these conversations in the past, not as the be-all end-all of the class rankings, but more so just to help apply a bit of context to how things are looking at the tippity top end of players working towards a very palpable goal of the first player to hit level 100, and that honor has now been claimed by Resurrect 2. That said, today we'll go over how things have been changing, the current way that I would order the Ascendancies in comparison to each other, especially as new builds and playstyles are developing around these, and the differences between the Ascendancies that are good league starters versus ones that will show their true potential only really after you have the currency and gear to properly make them shine. That said, while I talk about each class, I will be showing footage of a deep endgame build that represents what the class looks like at a high level, and the channel of the build's creator will be on screen while this is happening if you have particular interest in the build and would like to see more details or ask them any questions about how it works. That said, while even the Ascendancy in last place is fully capable of doing all endgame content, we have to draw a line of comparison somewhere, and so sadly in last, I've got the Acolyte of Chayula. Compared to the last time that we talked about the classes like this, there has been some change. This Ascendancy has its own spot developing a little bit in the form of applying poison through quarterstaff skills as a way of scaling chaos damage with them to take advantage of the bonus chaos damage Ascendancy nodes. Even with that considered, however, it's definitely underperforming compared to the other Ascendancies, and while it's starting to find its place and some proper builds are beginning to crop up for it, the players using this Ascendancy are still struggling to find its particular niche that makes it worth using over the other Ascendancies with the same general build concepts otherwise. In second to last place then, I've got the Chronomancer. The strongest Chronomancer setups are not bad by any means, but one of them is just massively committing to cast on freeze with Comet, and then the only real thing that the Ascendancy is actually adding in by itself is the ability to regen mana quickly through the Ascendancy skill when you dump it all too fast through like a bunch of Comet procs from the cast on freezes, or the other setup which is Hammer of the Gods and Stampede, which is basically just the Chronomancer version of the best Titan build, and the Ascendancy does make its mark here through the cooldown resetting and ignoring shenanigans, allowing Hammer of the Gods to be used more than once per fight against an enemy, which is honestly quite a big deal, but this isn't straight gain either. You're giving up some of what makes the build strong for Titans as well, losing the bonuses to small passive nodes that Titans get, the bonus strength that Titans get, the concept of crushing blows allowing you to instant heavy stun any primed enemies, which helps Titan do the Stampede chains. This isn't to say Chronomancer is necessarily bad, it's just not shown itself to be stronger than the Ascendancies that I have ahead of it at this moment. Then we have the Warbringer, which is the first big deviation that I'll be taking from the ladder rankings, and the main reason is not that this Ascendancy is necessarily weak, but generally the things that I value most when ranking these are output and speed potential above just pure survivability, and I generally also give some bonus points if an Ascendancy has a type of synergy that lets it work with multiple different build styles and always creates its own unique niche within them too. Warbringer has basically two setups that work specifically with it, and more than anything you hit ridiculous amounts of survivability with Warbringer, which is great, but then compared to other classes your movement is relatively slow while doing it, it's not the fastest, and the armor break auto attack build got nerfed with the recent changes to armor explosion not being able to proc itself anymore. Stampede still works, but it is a bit clunky, and then you've got totem based builds, which are really cool, but again it gets outpaced in speed more than anything else. Next up then let's talk about the Pathfinder, and I'm sort of back and forth about this one at the moment honestly. They actually have the lowest ranking top player of the ladder race to level 100 at this point of any of the Ascendancies, and that's not to say that it means they are losing power or anything, because I've seen stronger builds popping up for this Ascendancy than ever before. These ones focusing more around Poisonous Concoction as a main source of damage, working around not only the Ascendancy specific skill that is Poisonous Concoction, but then also the various Pathfinder nodes that synergize with poison, which is great too. The main issues with this are for the lengthier single target fights like boosted difficulty pinnacle bosses, it can run out of flash charges before it bursts the whole thing down, but even outside of that it's still doing very well. The main issue that presents itself is, in my eyes, twofold here. Firstly, that the Ascendancy just seems to not be all that powerful in the early to mid game compared to most of the other Ascendancies, so you have to get very solid endgame gear before it starts to really kick off. And then secondly, the thing that I always say about this Ascendancy, which is that it is essentially always as strong as poison is as a concept in the game. There will be very few builds based around poisons that aren't best done on a Pathfinder because of some of the nodes, and you'll struggle to find a build that's better on Pathfinder than any other Ascendancy unless it's focused around poisons. So they are stuck in a bit of a very specific niche. After that, then I've got the Witchhunter Ascendancy, and we're nearing the sort of middle ground where these Ascendancies are all sort of average in the grand scheme of things. They're all strong, there are multiple builds that function for them at a high level, they just aren't quite in the realm of absolutely busted absurd until we hit the really highly ranked ones. For Witchhunter, then, it's just a super solid Ascendancy. You've got Pitiless Killer as an Ascendancy node, which gives you just permanent Culling Strike, allowing you to execute enemies without emptying their full health bar. You've got Zealous Inquisition, which is a 10% chance when killing enemies to make them explode for their entire maximum life pool, which gives you a very natural source of bonus AoE and map clearing potential too. Then, depending on the build, you might go Decimating Strike to chunk a massive slice off of the front end of every enemy health bar too. Maybe you go Witchbane and No Mercy to build up a debuff on enemy that stops them from being able to cast spells, or you go with Sorcery Ward and its boost as well for reduced incoming elemental damage. There is variety, there are multiple strong routes you can take with it, and it is simply a very solid Ascendancy. Next up in 7th place, let's talk about the Titan. It can hit ridiculous amounts of survivability, though Titan can achieve a slightly stronger and more consistent mix of burst damage for single target, like bossing or even just heftier rares. But also due to the Crushing Blows Ascendancy node, they can trigger heavy stun on primed enemies, allowing you to pair with the Devastate support gem to fully break armor and cause armor explosions, which then radiate out through Herald of Ash, popping with the overkill damage. This specific combo makes the mapping, the clear, work fine, and then the ability to scale strength and then boost the potency of all small passive nodes really adds up throughout your skill tree, especially as you get deeper into the skill tree, gaining more and more levels. That said, the limiting factor is sort of similar to Warbringer, and that the stronger the build gets for the class, the less mobile it tends to end up compared to the other Ascendancies. The top Titan builds that I've seen seem stronger than the top Warbringer ones, which is why it is in a higher slot overall on this list, but while Stampede isn't terrible for movement, it is just really janky and clunky and uncomfortable compared to the way that other Ascendancy's best builds are able to move and work through maps. Then in 6th place, I've got the Infernalist. The main reason is that it seems to be slowing down the further we get into the actual lifetime of the game. It's a strong league starter, it has a really powerful curve from the start of the game into mid-game and directly into the start of endgame too, but then at the top end, when it's really just powerful gear starting to come into consideration too in the deeper parts of endgame, it's just falling a bit behind a few of the other Ascendancies. It is still very good for most players, but the main issues I've heard high-level Infernalists mention is that it almost feels like it isn't really a minion Ascendancy so much as it is just the best Ascendancy that exists for scaling minions currently. It doesn't make minion builds more fun or make them do things that you can't do in other setups. All it does is give you the potential for some more minions through scaling some extra spirit, and give you a Hellhound. There is power available within the Infernalist Ascendancy nodes too, but long-term with the full 8 points, there is simply more that you can generally get out of a lot of other Ascendancies unless you are looking for minion builds or pure survivability, which you actually can gain quite a bit for Infernalist. Then in 5th place, I've got Deadeye, and this is the point where we are getting to some really powerful Ascendancies, the ones capable of fueling the most ridiculous builds that currently exist in Path of Exile 2 in its early access form. Deadeye absolutely excels at elemental projectile damage, specifically due to the Ascendancy node that gives an extra projectile fired per projectile skill use, and then also the ones that give you bonus skill speed, as well as tailwind stacks gained every time that you use a skill, which gives you movement speed, skill speed, and evasion with every stack, as well as damage reduction per stack too if you also take that Ascendancy node as well. This is just sort of as a base, makes it really strong with mixing for the already strong projectile skills that Deadeye has, and elemental skills can get very wacky with this. The one at the top of the list being Lightning Rod with Lightning Arrow, procs to trigger it, and then they've recently upgraded to also using the Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder combo that monks most commonly have been taking significant advantage of to chain explode enemies in dense group content even off of your screen. Speaking of which, in 4th place, I've got the Invoker. Despite being the first Ascendancy to have a level 100 player, that is a bit of an outlier, with Resurrect 2 taking advantage of Temporalis as a unique body armor that the vast majority of players will never be able to achieve, but using that purely for movement speed through the map in conjunction with the Blink Spirit skill, which normally would have a cooldown, but with Temporalis at a max roll of 4 seconds removed from the cooldown of all skills, can make Blink actually properly spammable as a 0 cooldown skill. That said, outside of this ridiculousness specifically, Invoker is really strong for a number of different reasons, which has been shown through the sort of cycle that the game has been through as of this point. At first, a lot of the strongest builds were all based off of meta skills, things like cast on shock, cast on freeze, cast on crit, cast on ignite, cast on minion death. They were all going absolutely nuts, and Invoker has a Ascendancy nodes that give triggered spells bonus damage, and specifically increases the energy generated for meta skills. Then that was nerfed quite heavily, and Invoker was still really strong because it has the capability for massive variety even just within its Ascendancy nodes. It has a node that lets you scale Spirit off of the defensive stats on your body armor, which can easily lead to having more than like 230 Spirit without the need for the equipment enabling that amount. You can lean into crits and ignoring elemental resistances with them on your enemies, which is in itself a very strong ability. Then you can gain bonus damage as cold or lightning or both, and when something says gain whatever percent damage as cold or lightning like this, it's basically a multiplier applied after all prior damage increases, so it's actually a very sizable damage increase. And then it creates either chilled or shocked ground too, which has its own potential for synergies with things like Eye of Winter as a spell. To put things short, the Ascendancy has multiple different playstyles that it can boost, and a lot of the times they overlap with each other as well. It's just built extremely well. Moving into third place then, we have the Stormweaver, which is all over the top rankings on the experience gain ladder, partially because it's the most popular Ascendancy in the game by far, and partially because it's just incredibly powerful. Where Invoker has the ability to adjust to a ton of different playstyles, Stormweaver is sort of very hedged, specifically due to Ascendancy nodes that grant Arcane Surge, which gives you bonus cast speed and mana regeneration, but then another node that scales the effects of Arcane Surge that you have off of your maximum mana, then the existence of the Archmage Spirit skill for sorceress as well, which gives you significant bonus damage as lightning on your spells dependent on your maximum mana, and so you are very shoehorned into building absolutely massive mana pools and taking all of the synergies that go with that, like Mind Over Matter to make damage come from your mana before your life pool, and then just building super hefty energy shields as well, and stacking intelligence for interacting with the pure power notable, which gives you lightning damage depending on your intelligence, but also just the fact that intelligence as an attribute gives you more bonus maximum mana to begin with. It is an extremely powerful natural synergy that exists with this Ascendancy, and it makes it hard to recommend playing it any other way really, but that main way is so strong it deserves this spot without a doubt. Then we have the top two right now, and these are just pretty much the beyond ridiculous ones. In second place I have Gemling Legionnaire. This Ascendancy has slowly been rising in its general power capability since early access launch, doing what pretty much everyone predicted of it, and being something that was perfectly fine for League start, but just would eventually become absolutely naughty and full deep endgame gear setup with a bunch of high-powered uniques and high-rolled rares around them too. The main build I've seen pop off for this is the full attribute stacking Pillar of the Gods and Hand of Wisdom in action unique focused build. The main concept is stacking strength, which scales weapon damage, but then more so dex to scale loads of attack speed, and then intelligence to scale both area of effect and flat lightning damage on attacks as well. Then just building as much of all three attributes as you physically can from your gear and your passive tree, with the Gemling Ascendancy having its own special nodes that are a percentage boost to all attributes, but then also the ability to not just have bonus skill slots, which is nice to play with, but more importantly the ability to use the same support gem in two different skill links, rather than in every other Ascendancy, which is locked to using just one copy of the same support gem anywhere within their build. Then finally in first place we have the Blood Mage, and while this has had a bit of a rough start at the beginning of early access, with Life Leech not quite working as intended to begin with, it has slowly gained power as people have reached further endgame builds. It is actually undeniably tied to the strongest current build that we've seen in the game too, which is Temporalis with Choir of the Storms. Choir of the Storms procs Lightning Bolt when you get a critical hit, but by default this has a short internal cooldown, stopping you from doing a super high attack or cast speed build with really high crit chance around this. However, Temporalis straight up removes the cooldown of anything with a 4-second or less cooldown, which for whatever reason includes this internal cooldown, which means with both equipped, any critical hit will trigger Lightning Bolt, even Lightning Bolt critically hitting itself. You then combine this with Blink, which goes to 0 cooldown with Temporalis, cast on Dodge, which works extremely well with Blink to cast Shock very easily, cast on Crit to basically automate more Shock casts as well, but pairing that with the Life Tap support gem to convert the mana cost from this one into life costs, because otherwise you'd empty your mana gauge in an instant once the crits start going. And you can use the Life Leech bonus from the Ascendancy nodes to help make up for this too. Then the fact that the Blood Mage can make spells have a 15% base crit chance as well, and also give them bonus crit damage too, makes it a very natural Ascendancy pairing for this quite specific, ridiculously powerful build that very few players will ever get to play before it inevitably does get nerfed. But it proves that Blood Mage has a very strong potential as a foundation for any deep endgame build that wants to crit with spells and has a high mana cost that can be converted through Life Tap and leashed back through Life Leech. That just about does it for today, everyone. My current rankings of every Ascendancy in Path of Exile 2 based on quite a few different factors, but mostly just considering what makes them special, how many playstyles they work with, and how they compare compare to each other on actual usability throughout the game. Make sure to check out the original build creators if you want to know more about their builds. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.